Today, we are going to look at a big question that sits behind so many headlines. Is the so-called rules-based international order ending? And are we entering a world where only raw national interest matters? To explore that, I want to start with one document, the new United States National Security Strategy. It is not emotional. It is not dramatic. But if you read it closely, it tells a story about where the world is going. For years, Western leaders spoke about something called the rules-based international order. The idea was simple. There are rules, there are institutions, and the strongest power, the United States, helps enforce those rules so that all countries benefit. In practice, things were never that clean. But at least the language of rules and cooperation created limits. It created expectations. It suggested that power should be exercised through shared systems. In the new strategy, that story is basically gone. What you see instead is a blunt statement: the global order is breaking down. Rival powers are rising. Competition is normal, and every country must defend its own interests first. The United States describes its top priority as protecting its national interests, with one region placed at the center: the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, the space traditionally covered by something called the Monroe Doctrine. So let us explain that in plain language. The Monroe Doctrine goes back to the 19th century. It says that Latin America and the Caribbean belong inside the strategic sphere of the United States, not as colonies, but as a region where outside great powers should not interfere. So over time, that idea produced a long record of interventions, covert operations, regime changes, and military pressure across Central and South America. Many people in the region remember that history deeply, and now the logic appears again. The new strategy claims that China and Russia have been expanding too deeply into the region, especially China. It is worried not about ideology, but about trade loans, ports, railways, and resource deals that tie South American economies more closely to Beijing. From the point of view of Brazil, Peru, or Argentina, this kind of cooperation often brings infrastructure and investment that improves daily life. But from Washington's point of view, it feels like a rival power moving into its backyard. But so, policy response, we have seen a buildup of United States naval forces in the Caribbean. Roughly 1/10 of naval assets are now concentrated there. We've also seen direct actions, like the interception of a Venezuelan oil tanker that was diverted to Houston. These are not symbolic gestures. They send a clear message that we control these waters. We decide which flows of energy and trade are acceptable. And here is where things get more dangerous. Many South American governments do not see this as a narrow anti-cartel operation or a moral campaign against corruption. They see it as a blunt reminder that their sovereignty is conditional, that if they lean too far toward China, they can be punished. They also remember the past: CIA-backed coups, civil wars, military juntas, millions harmed. Now they are told again that they cannot fully choose their partnerships. At the same time, China presents itself as a partner that builds. It builds ports, it builds railways, it signs long-term deals. For ordinary citizens, that is visible. It feels practical. So the continent faces a difficult choice between two very different kinds of power. Here's the key part. This tension is not only about Latin America, it connects to a bigger global picture. The United States is now confronting Russia in Eastern Europe. It is also pressuring Iran in the Middle East. And at the same time, it is trying to limit Chinese trade routes and access to resources. Once you pull on all these threads at once, something important happens. The system becomes fragile. Think of world politics as a web. You cannot pull aggressively on one part of the web without shaking the others. If the United States tightens control in the Caribbean, Russia and China will respond elsewhere. If Iran is pressured, shipping routes and oil supplies may be affected. If Europe escalates in Ukraine, Russia responds again. And each reaction pushes the others further. This is how regional conflicts stop being regional. It is not because leaders wake up one morning and say, "Let us start a world war." It is because each side feels forced to respond in order to defend its position, and nobody knows how to reverse the chain once it starts. Now, let us pause and summarize the main ideas so far, clearly and simply. The old language about a rules-based world is fading. The new language is about competition and self-interest. The Western Hemisphere is treated as a protected zone. Actions in Latin America are deeply tied to rivalry with China. And all of this links together with confrontations in Europe and the Middle East. When that many flashpoints exist at once, the risk of escalation rises. Some people argue that this is simply realism. They say every country always pursues its own interests. That may be true, but the number of shared limits matters. The number of agreed rules matters. When those disappear, the system becomes harsher and more unpredictable. It also sends a message inward to citizens. It says that victory matters more than cooperation, that dominance is more important than negotiation. Over time, that shapes political culture. It makes societies more comfortable with permanent conflict. So where does this leave us? If we are entering a period where great powers act more openly, worry less about legitimacy, and treat regions like property. Latin America becomes a test case, not just for Venezuelan politics, but for the future relationship between the United States, China, and the emerging global South. And what happens there will not stay there. So in the next episode, we will turn to another front that is deeply connected to this story, the war in Ukraine, the choices of European leaders, and the dangerous belief that wars can stay limited. We will look at why so many states think they can manage escalation and why history shows that they often cannot. Thank you for listening. I hope you join me for the next chapter,